Okay, hi everyone. I hope this is working. Can you see me? I hope we're working now. Yes, I can see we've got some live viewers. So at last, technical difficulties have been dealt with and we are now online. I'm very sorry, everyone. My computer decided my presentation was just too good to handle and it crashed. So this is a very, very strange situation. I'm just sitting here in my house, missing all of you. I'm doing my first ever live stream. So bear with me, not sure how it's all going. But I'd just like to say welcome everybody to the first Camcycle monthly meeting. My name's Roxanne. I'm the executive director of Camcycle. Lucky I'm our first guest speaker, so I get to experiment on myself. But what I'll do is dive quite quickly into the presentation, and then we will have a bit of time. Hi everyone. I don't know what happened. I'll just sit here and give everybody a chance to get back online. Okay, we'll kick off again. Right, welcome everybody to the Camcycle monthly meeting, take two, very late after a few technical difficulties. Let's see how we go. Here is my introduction. So my presentation today, what I'd like to do is talk about what it was like to study cycling in a fietsparadijs, a cycling paradise. And then find out, well, if we want one of these cycling paradises, how do we do it? Is the answer culture? Is the answer planning and infrastructure? And what can we learn from these lessons to help us with our own campaigning? Right, well, let's start with the experience. And we started with cycling adventures. So I decided to cycle all the way from Cambridge to Amsterdam, and this was my first solo cycling experience. So I caught the train from Cambridge to Harwich International, which wasn't straightforward because my train was cancelled and I had to do two changes in the cold, waiting around, and I made the ferry by only 10 minutes, but it seemed to me like they knew I was coming and they were waiting for me. So got on the ferry to for the overnight journey to the Hook of Holland. And as anyone else who has done this journey before can tell you, you cycle off that ferry and you are just immediately in paradise. So from that morning, I had my healthy big breakfast on the ferry and then proceeded to cycle about 100 kilometers to get to Amsterdam that evening. And as you can see from the slide, it was just heaven. So I thought we could all start this talk with a deep breath and just look at that smooth, wide, relaxing cycle path laid out in front of us and just clear our minds of maybe any other issues we might be thinking about at the moment and just relax before we head off into this talk. What we see here is the LF1 cycle route, which goes along the coast north from the Hook of Holland towards Zandvoort, from where we turn right and we go through Haarlem before we get to Amsterdam. It's all very straightforward. You don't even need a map. Even someone like me, who is notorious at getting lost, did not need a map, except for when I took a detour to have a coffee and managed to get lost in a car park. But I will say it was all smooth sailing until I got to Amsterdam, where I proceeded to be lost for a good hour in peak hour cycle traffic, which perhaps in other circumstances would be stressful, but I'm a true cycling campaigner and any excuse to cycle around with lots of other people for an hour will do me, even if it's getting lost. But once getting there, I very quickly made some friends with my classmates. And before we'd even started class, we all went on an adventure to Groningen for the International Cargo Bike Festival and managed to get a bit distracted, found ourselves I don't know what you call this, a cycling van with beer, which we tried to cycle around the block, but it broke and we ended up pushing it most of the way, much to the bemusement of the locals. But one of the great things about this experience was meeting people from all over the world with really different experiences about cycling and either campaigning for cycling or actually working in the planning of the transport industry, implementing cycling schemes. We all had really different perspectives and different approaches and understanding of how we might go about getting more cycling for our city. And what's amazing as well is that we're all still connected, and we have this great group of people to call on for advice, to champion each other, to commiserate with the challenges we face in our various countries, and to celebrate the wins that we have. And part of being in this cohort of students means we also tap into the entire Planning the Cycling City alumni. So a great source for advice and encouragement there. And I can't wait to be reunited. I was hoping to see some of my classmates in Slovenia this year, but maybe it will have to be next year when we can all see each other again. One of the other great experiences of this course was just how relaxed you could be in the urban environment. This is a pretty standard street just around the corner from my accommodation. I had about 4 different roads I could choose to start my journey to university every day, but I seem to pick this one the most. It seems to have everything. It has cycle infrastructure, trams, cafes, shops, cycle parking, interesting bikes, trees, greenery, birds, people, and a few cars as well. And it's just felt like a really lively street. This is quite early in the morning, so maybe we haven't got as many people in this photo, but in the evening you'd have people out in the street as well. And somehow you could feel like it was really busy and you were part of something buzzing, yet also really calm. And that's because there was just such a low amount of traffic from cars and traveling quite slowly. So this was just one of the fabulous streets, and I found myself quite relaxed. Even I know a lot of people can feel quite nervous cycling in Amsterdam because it gets really busy and quite it can feel quite aggressive with the cycle traffic. But once you work out how to navigate it, you'd find you just get in with the flow and you feel quite relaxed. And for me, every morning and evening, not having that dose of adrenaline from close passes and aggressive driving, I found that it didn't just make me feel better during my commute, but I somehow felt better all day, which is probably unsurprising that feeling scared for your life a few times a day might make you a bit anxious for the whole day. So for me, it was a really big lesson, even though I've been to the Netherlands for holidays before, but sort of having this regular routine day to day and realizing that you still had a sense of that holiday feeling because you weren't anxious on your commute. It's definitely something we should be aspiring to. So another part of the experience was riding a Dutch bike, or as the Dutch might call it, a bike, or perhaps more specifically a fiets, or even more precisely an oma fiets. So this was my grandma bike that I got to ride every day. And the course organizers were very particular that we must get a proper Dutch bike so we could truly have that experience. But also that we needed to make sure we didn't look like tourists, because turns out if you look like a tourist, people will expect you to behave like a tourist and they'll avoid you, and you won't get that true cycling experience, or they might just hurl some abuse at you when you make a mistake. So kind of going incognito with a proper Dutch bike was an important part of the experience. And we were being prepped for this before the course even started, because we had to do what they call an autoethnographic study. And that was basically writing a diary about our experience prior to coming to the course, and having that time to really stop and think about, what do you feel like when you ride your bike? What is your body doing? What is your mind doing? What are you observing? Really was starting to open our minds up so that when we got to Amsterdam, we were really open to observe the effects that cycling on this type of bike and in this type of environment was having on us. Now, I felt like I was probably a bit ahead of the curve in this experiment because I ride a Dutch bike every day here in Cambridge, but my Dutch bike has handbrakes. And my Oma Feets did not have handbrakes, it had back pedals. And so that was a really integral part to my experience, to see how I adapted to these pedals or these brakes over the three weeks of the course. And at first it just felt really, really bizarre and really challenging. And I felt like I lost, in a way, some of my grace and my comfort and ease on the bike, because I couldn't sort of slow to a stop and sort of step through and get off the bike. I had to completely learn how to get on, get off, stop and start. And I felt really klutzy and like a beginner again. But I found towards the end, I became really accustomed to having a bike like this. The fact is, when you have pedal brakes, you don't need to use your hands so much, and you might be able to be more expressive when you're speaking and use your hands more. If you were allowed to, you could perhaps use your mobile phone while you were cycling, something which was banned halfway during the course. And so I actually began to realize this is how the Dutch do it. This is how they cycle with an umbrella or with an ice cream or with all the crazy things we see the Dutch doing. It's enabled by having these pedal brakes. And there was something about this where you started to feel more like you were one with the bike. So it sounds like I'm going on and on about what it was like to ride a bike, but this was a really important part of the course, was really paying attention to how our mind changed and how our body changed in response to this changed environment. And you can imagine, for people who've perhaps never ridden a step-through bike, never ridden a bike that was so upright, had always been on more of a road bike, this was a really, really big transition. And it was so important to understanding what it is like to cycle in the Netherlands. So we had all of this done, and then we started our course, where everything we were expecting to happen was kind of scratched out. So if we came with our tape measure expecting to measure the cycle lanes and come home with the optimum width of a cycle lane that we should install, or expecting this fabulous manual of here's what you should build and everybody will come and, you know, it's easy, here's the manual, take this from Amsterdam and take it home and create your own cycling city. But very quickly, our instructor, Marco, kind of shattered that illusion. And I think he took quite a lot of joy in trying to get us more confused on a higher level. He said that a lot, and certainly at times we were. So I say to everyone watching this today that if you do get confused during this presentation, don't worry, I'm still a bit confused. I'm still trying to get all the different things that I learned during this course to match, and the fact is some of it is contradictory, because this isn't a straightforward simple recipe that we can copy. And you know, what we might find is that perhaps we'll wander into some musings, like I already have, about using pedal brakes, because I'm just trying to work this out for myself. But I think what's really important is that it's not about, I'm not here to try and tell everybody here are some answers. What I would like for us is that we just start to challenge some of the things that we think we already know, and look at how that can help us with our campaigning. And also to think about, well, what are some of these things that we're holding on to as our truths, and perhaps using that to understand the truths that others may be holding on to, and maybe thinking about how we could help to confuse them and help bring them to our side. I'm not sure. But anyway, if you're expecting a nice, straightforward infrastructure presentation today, that's not where we're going. And I will admit that for some reason now, my presentation's not showing me my notes either. So we're all winging this together now. So my first thing is it culture that makes the Dutch cycle more? Well, there's some hints that that is the case. So we have less inequality in the Netherlands, particularly I think compared to the United Kingdom. So in the Netherlands, you have something which is called conspicuous non-consumption, where you don't want to be too flashy. In fact, maybe you want to hide how wealthy you might be. You want to look more even with other people. And so we see that, you know, people might go out of their way to have a rough bike. I mean, this is quite an extreme example. This one was pulled out of the canal, but I mean, we saw bikes that were almost this rough getting around Amsterdam. So we're already starting out with a culture of, you know, somewhat uniformity, where everybody can afford a bike. Everyone's bike looks about the same. This isn't about status for anyone. But where did this begin, and how could we have this kind of culture? Well, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, which we were encouraged to do during this course, and I wanted to get to the bottom of this. How far back do we have to go so that we can create this kind of society? And well, I ended up way back to the 1500s, when my ancestors actually had to leave the area of the Netherlands, but back to the Golden Age, where what we actually had was a rapid urbanization in the Netherlands. And what this had was a lot of people of different wealth levels, different class levels, all of a sudden living and working in very close proximity to each other. And so this could have been the start of this conspicuous non-consumption, not trying to be too flashy with your status so that you could get along with your neighbors. I mean, this is just one factor among many factors of Dutch culture that could perhaps be leading to this kind of habitus or culture of this conspicuous non-consumption that makes cycling so appealing. But that's just one rabbit hole that perhaps we could dive down. But that's interesting because it is really different to what we see in the United Kingdom. We know in London, you know, there was this mass urbanization as well, but what we seem to have is this nobility and this class system where people wanted to be showing their status a lot more. And over the generations, this just hasn't changed enough to make cycling something that could be used by all. And even today, we can see that cycling still can be a reflection of status, and perhaps this is emerging even more in the Netherlands. And something I'm intrigued by is what happens when cycling starts to become a status symbol. Is cycling something for the working class? Is it something you do if you can't afford a car? But then what if you have a really expensive road bike? Is cycling something for people who are wealthy and rich and have time for leisure and to play? And what we're even seeing in the Netherlands is there's the cargo bike is actually a reflection of status. There's this phenomenon of the cargo bike mum, which is seen as a symbol of gentrification, and of these mums that are aggressive and arrogant and barging their way through with their cargo bike. And I think there's actually another great deep dive that you could go down, looking at this intersection of feminism and cycling, and why it's women with cargo bikes that seem to attract that kind of perception or image. And I think it's intriguing that we don't seem to have that to that extent in the UK or in Cambridge. But anyway, bringing that back to what could that mean for us? I wonder if we made the bicycle a status symbol, something to aspire to, would that help us in our campaigning? Or does that alienate people from cycling? But when we live in a society now, which is just still has such sort of class distinctions where you want to showcase your status, how can the bicycle fit within that world? Perhaps in Cambridge, we see that we have a bit more of this. You don't know who's cycling next to you on what rundown old bike and what their life might be like. It's harder to make those snap judgments, but perhaps in other parts of the UK, the bike is still some kind of status symbol. But then we see in the Netherlands that actually the bike appeals to all levels of society, including the royal family. Now, I can't really think of a time or of any picture I've seen of the British royal family on a bicycle. There are stories that Queen Victoria may have once cycled a tricycle, but we have no evidence of that. But here in the Netherlands, we see the royal family on bikes, and that helps to dignify cycling and the bicycle, and and help to elevate it in people's esteem in their culture. You know, everybody cycles, including the royal family. Cycling is normal and aspirational and appealing, but also the bicycle is a symbol or a vehicle for the royal family to then show, well, actually we're normal everyday people, and we can connect with you because we use the same kind of transport as well. And now we see this with the Dutch Prime Minister as well, regularly cycling. And now we see Prime Ministers of other countries, when they come to the Netherlands, they get on a bike too. So this is a really interesting sort of two-way dynamic where, you know, we can see people from perhaps elite positions using the bicycle to make them more relatable, more down to earth to the people they're trying to lead. But also by doing that, they elevate the image of the bicycle to make it more appealing to the people in their country. So could we get the royal family on bikes in the UK? I'm not sure. But what we do have are, you know, our several MPs from Cambridge who have cycled, a lot of our councillors. You know, we have a lot of influential people in Cambridge who do cycle, yet I wonder why cycling still doesn't seem to have that same type of status and respect and investment that should come from that kind of status. But is there something we can do to elevate that? And then what we now see are generations of cycling. So we've had 5 generations of the Dutch royal family cycling, and I guess we could say that we've had similar generations, well, I would say more than 5 generations of Dutch citizens cycling. So when you have parents who have grown up on the bike and they train their children very, very young to get on the bike, and then those children will teach their children, cycling is just such a normal, everyday part of life. You don't even think about it. And what we find is that research suggests that Dutch children are the happiest children in the world, or among the happiest children in the world, and among the healthiest children in the world as well. And can we look to cycling as one of the key reasons for that? You know, independence is correlated with childhood happiness, and physical activity like cycling is correlated with mental and physical health. So if you've got children cycling, they've got their independence, they're getting all their exercise. But not only does that make children happy, but it's my assumption that it probably makes the parents happy as well, because if you don't have to ferry your children around everywhere, if they can get themselves to school, if they can get themselves to visit their friends, that actually takes a lot of pressure off parents, and parents therefore have a lot more time to themselves. And what you also seem to get is a lot more resilience, because if you're out being independent, you have to do your own problem solving, you have to deal with your own issues, you have to cycle in the rain and the wind, and there's a saying in the Netherlands, you're not made of sugar, you won't melt, and you're expected to cycle in the rain and in the wind. And I think that if you've got through all of that, you must become a lot more resilient to the challenges that life may throw at you. So we start with children, we get that resilience, generations teaching each other to cycle. If you've got that happening, I just can't see how people would be objecting to improvements to cycling if you know it's just going to make your children safer and more independent. And then we see one of the fastest growing categories of cycling in the Netherlands is, I guess, the baby boomer generation, particularly with the advent of e-bikes. More and more people are getting out, and I still remember my first cycling trip in the Netherlands a few years ago with my husband. I think I was on a 3-speed heavy Dutch bike, feeling like I was going quite fast though, and you know, I'm young, I'm fit, and then I got overtaken by about 20 women who would have been in their 60s, 70s, possibly even older. And one by one, they all just zoomed past me. And I was like, what is going on? What's happened? Why am I so slow? Before I realized they were all on e-bikes. And I've just never seen that level of activity, that level of socializing and cycling ever in the United Kingdom from that age group. And you know, just made me, I think that's something I aspire to. I want to be in my 70s and zooming around with 20 of my best friends, having coffee and overtaking those silly 30-year-olds on their non-electric bikes. So we're seeing all these generations cycling. In fact, there's just from what we were learning on this course, the sort of the one age group where cycling probably declines is that sort of 30s age group, when people are at work having young children. They tend to get in the car a bit more. We also see it's the immigrants, or the children of immigrants to the Netherlands, have lower cycling rates as well, because they've not inherited that culture. They may bring a more status-driven culture, or quite simply, they don't know how to ride a bike. The parents don't know how to cycle. They don't know how to teach the children to cycle. But there's quite a push in the Netherlands to help those groups to get cycling. And we visited a program called Mama Agata while we were there, where Mama Agata is helping women learn to cycle. And there's a fabulous documentary about that, which we'll actually link to on our website later on, to show just how life-changing it is for them to learn to cycle and get their independence, and then either teach their children to cycle or be able to keep up with their children while they're cycling. And you see those big smiles on their faces. Cycling is definitely correlated to happiness. But it was the parents in the 1970s in the Netherlands that really turned the tide on this car-dominated development that was happening all around the world. And they launched a campaign called Stop the Kindermoord, or Stop the Child Murder. And that was really about just the increasing rates of children who were dying or being murdered by cars on the road. And these parents, this national campaign, just really had enough of that. And it was this campaign that really turned the tide, and we started to see interventions to reduce that car domination. I mean, I would say that the Netherlands is still very car oriented, but maybe not car dominated now like we are in the United Kingdom. And I think there's a lot to learn from this campaign and some of the early infrastructure interventions that came as a result of that. But I would say, if you have time, digging in deeper around just a whole catalyst of things that were happening in Amsterdam around this time, with other developments and other protests, and thinking about livable neighborhoods and diverse neighborhoods, it's just really fascinating. There were just so many pieces of that puzzle that came together at one time to really start to shift that conversation. But I think most campaigners in Cambridge have heard about this in other presentations and guest speakers, this Stop the Kindermoord movement in the Netherlands. And they're still campaigning, but we're a way to go. So one of the early infrastructure interventions that came around that time were the Unravelling, or Unif, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but there were these quiet residential streets where they took out car traffic, or really, really calmed the car traffic. You can't rat run through here. It's very narrow, and really turned these streets into places for people. And we see these all over the Netherlands, and it's amazing that we're now starting to see these in the UK, perhaps called mini Hollands, where you really turn this into a street for people where the cars can access if they need. So this is one of those first interventions, but I guess this now takes us to then the second question of, well, we've talked about culture and that's a bit of the answer, but what about, is infrastructure the answer? Let's take a look. So we start with these residential interventions, which can make some residential streets nice, but clearly there's more to it than that. One of the aspects that I found really interesting was land use planning. And I think it's something that is really, it's hard for us as campaigners to think about this because it happens so early on in the process. And by the time we get to dealing with planning applications, to the layout of an area is already firmly agreed, and all we can do is ask for cycle lanes on certain roads or cycle parking. Whereas actually so much of what makes a cycling city work is about the layout. And actually, if you get the layout right, you don't need as much specific cycling infrastructure because the streets are for cycling. So a couple of interesting things. We looked at a map which showed just how many Albert Heijns, and Albert Heijn is the local supermarket, but just how many Albert Heijns there were in Amsterdam and how close together they all were. But these were all quite small shops. And then if you looked at newer developed areas in places where there were a lot there was a lot more car traffic, you would see that the Albert Heijns were spread out further apart and were perhaps bigger supermarkets. But in Amsterdam, the planning rules mean that you can't have a big department store or a big box store. Everything is a lot smaller. And what this means is that everybody has a supermarket really close to them. And in front of all of these Albert Heijns, you'll see like this, rows and rows of bicycles. And it's basically, they seem to be perfectly designed to pull up on your bike, go in, buy just the amount that you need, put it on your bike, and then take it back to your house. But what this all comes to is having the right kind of density. So it starts to change everything about how you live your life. To have that kind of density, you're probably living in a smaller place. That means you probably have a smaller fridge, which means you buy your shopping more frequently in smaller amounts, which is perfect for your bicycle trip. And everything is close to you and you can get to it all by your bike. And it's a bit of chicken or egg. Which part of these things came first? And really it all has to come together through the land use planning. And perhaps the design of Amsterdam around the canals has helped with that as well, because there simply just isn't that space to really push so many cars through. Although decades ago, they certainly tried. And even now, it can still feel like there's sometimes too many cars in Amsterdam down some of these roads. But by having everything close by, really, Amsterdam has been doing something for years that we're seeing popping up in other cities called the 15-minute city, or in Barcelona, we have these super block structures. So there are various different approaches to this, but ultimately it's about having everything you need within a short walk or bicycle ride from your home. And maybe that means we need to live in slightly smaller homes or change our life, but it works. It feels amazing. These are the places we like to go have holidays in. Why can't we live in places like that as well? And so something that I found really interesting is we think about the Netherlands as I guess a densely populated country. But one of the things on this course that got us a bit, starts to get you a bit more confused is, well, maybe we should think about the whole of the Netherlands as a city. And if you look at this map, it's just showing how the Netherlands compares to cities like New York or Los Angeles or London. And you realize that it's in scale, the country itself is not that different from some of these cities. But what makes it even more like a city is that amazing interconnectedness that we have across the country. And you can get from one side of the Netherlands, say to Amsterdam or to Utrecht, about as fast as you could get from one side of New York to the other. So what we have to be thinking about is not just the sorry, I'm checking questions that are coming through and I've got a bit distracted, but we shouldn't just be thinking about the geographic or the physical distance between places. We need to be thinking about the time between these places. And again, there's such a deep dive here, and I didn't just want to throw up lots of diagrams and not have time to adequately explain them. I'm not the expert, but we can imagine how close should everything be for you to ride your bike, or how close should you be to a train station? If you're close to a train station, how far is it to get to, say, Amsterdam? And really the magic of the Netherlands isn't just the cycling, it's the trains. We've lost a slide in my computer meltdown, but that's okay. We'll just draw a picture with our minds. So we've had a talk from Eric from the Dutch Cycling Embassy a few years ago, and he spoke about hybrid oriented development and how really what we need to think about is how we build up density around train stations and public transport hubs. And this is what has made this sort of Netherlands as a city work. And one of our lecturers actually proposed to us that we should start thinking about a new transport mode. Rather than saying multimodal, which is bike and train, why don't we think about bike and train actually as its own transport mode? Because this is what is so magic. If you can't get to the train without the bike, or you can't get to where you're going once you get off the train without your bike. And really thinking about this as its own mode of transport and making this as seamless as possible, and planning for that end-to-end journey from the door of your house to the door of your workplace or so on as one type of mode really starts to change how you think about these things. I hope this slide appears soon. We'll come back to that issue. In the interim, I know that it just won't be a presentation without a bit of infrastructure, but here is what we call the Bag of Fries Junction. And we were very fortunate while we were on this course to be invited to the offices of these fantastic transport engineers, where they gave us lots of Heinekens, and we all got to sit up there for an hour or two and just watch this amazing junction go by. And what I love about this is that, you know, if we come back here, here's what we all think about with the Netherlands. We think about, yes, priority over the side road, or really nice wide junction, great width of cycle lanes. You know, we want all these sort of technical things that you could get straight out of a Dutch manual about how to build cycling infrastructure. But actually, if you get any of the Dutch manuals like the Crow manual, it'll be out of date, because in the Netherlands, they're constantly innovating and experimenting. And yes, you can document that, but if you stick to the manual, then you're not innovating. So there's always these experiments. And that's what I loved about this. This is an experiment where perhaps people sitting up here on this balcony were watching what was happening below and realizing that the standard lane width, the same on both sides of the junction, just wasn't working. And if you observe the behavior of the cyclists, they were all spreading out at the stop line so that they could all take off at the start of the ride and jockey for position once they got to the other side of the junction. And so the engineers thought, well, what if we make that official? Let's actually paint the junction like that. So I wish I was in a room with you all and I could point and show you what I mean. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing here. Let's try. Yeah. Oh, I hope that works. So you can see here, this is actually quite wide, but once it gets to this side, it becomes quite narrower. And here, very, very narrow. And it works perfectly, actually. Everybody starts with this width and then they move down. And they call this a bag of fries junction because it's just like a bag of frites, you know, in the cone that you might get in the Netherlands or in Belgium. And all the fries, by the time they get through the junction, they shuffle down into the narrow point. And so something like this, you won't find in a manual. You need to experiment, you need to try it out. And I think that was just a really good lesson that we got from this course, which is I keep saying this, but there is no manual. And yes, we need design standards and we need to stick to them, but we need to give ourselves permission to experiment and to try things and to have that space in our transport environment to let these things happen. Otherwise, we'll never improve, or it will take too long to improve. And something simple like this, rather than punishing the cyclist for doing really what makes sense and maintaining flow and actually being as efficient as possible through this junction, perhaps that's something that should be embraced and implemented. And it was really fun to watch with the Heinekens. I'll try and find a video. Here we go. So we are back to the trains. Let me play you some footage of the Utrecht train station. So we're coming back. Apologies for my slides being a bit wonky, but coming back to this whole point of bike plus train and the Utrecht train station cycle parking, we were there just a week before they opened to their full capacity of about 12,000 cycle parking spaces. Wow, I'm really not very good at videos. Didn't realize that was covered half the time. But anyway, if you see in the top corner, it's really fantastic. There we go. You can actually cycle straight into the cycle park, right up to where you want to park your bike. You definitely need to note the number. There's actually an app that you can use. You scan the code once you park your bike. Let's see if we can make that work. There's your code there, so that you can keep track of where you've parked your bike and find it next time. And this is free for the first 24 hours. If you want to keep it there for longer, you have to pay. It's fully staffed. The payment for your cycle parking is integrated with your transport card. So it's really sleek, it's really smooth. And this is all about, when you consider this as one type of transport, how you need to build it. And I can't remember the statistics, but there's a huge proportion of cycle trips in the Netherlands are people cycling to the train station. And I think it's just really important that we think about how we integrate these modes of transport. I feel like I'm rushing through this, and I have barely scraped the surface at all. I've literally just tapped into a couple of things, but I really wanted to focus earlier on some of those cultural aspects. And the fact is, you can't just build infrastructure and people will come. You need to take people with you. You need to build that culture. If you don't have the culture supporting you, it's going to be such a battle to get the infrastructure built and get people to use it. So what lessons can we take from that to help us with our campaigning? Well, the first one, which I guess felt like a bit of a surprise, but it's that the Dutch are still campaigning. And this picture might not necessarily look, I mean, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, we'd love streets like this, but this is actually a campaign that we are looking at right here. We were so fortunate on this course that it was literally a day before we had this lecture. Ruth Oldenziel, who was our lecturer that day, had won this campaign to install a ton of parklets on her local streets for a month-long trial. And it was just so timely because, one, we were there, we got to see this immediately after it had been built, but two, I was right in the middle, quite stressfully while I was still away, of trying to get working with the team to get the Mill Road Parklet up and running. And we had fought so hard to get one parklet on Mill Road. This campaign, they had about 60. But it was just a work of genius because they had to close the street down, I believe, for gasworks as well. And so the local residents said, well, we want to try these parklets. We want to remove car parking, put in more cycle parking, try some more gardens and greening on the street. And they weren't able to do that. But they managed to find a loophole, which was something like getting a permit to create a movie, which meant they could actually reserve all these parking spaces. So they couldn't have it to improve the life of local residents, but they found this loophole. They could do it to make a movie. I don't even know if they did have to make the movie to get the permit, but that was the type of permit they had. And virtually in a weekend managed to install about 60 parklets, which included a variety of types of cycle parking, a lot of planting, a shared electric cargo bike scheme, a shared electric bike scheme with a charging hub, moped parking, which apparently the drivers of the mopeds decided not to use to park their mopeds because it was so nice. They were actually using it to sit and relax in and continue parking their mopeds or their scooters on the street. So it was inspiring in the middle of this Mill Road Parklet campaign to see, what could be achieved, but it was also somewhat disheartening that we were fighting so hard for one space, whereas, in somewhere else they managed to get 60. But it was still a real fight for the local residents. And this was on one of the busiest cycling streets, or perhaps the busiest cycling street in Amsterdam, Wisperside. And what I don't know is the outcome of this now. So I'd really like to follow that up and see if the campaign inspired the residents to support permanent change. But there were also some other innovative actions that they took. So for the residents who were parking their cars on this street, they found off-site parking in a multi-story parking unit and paid for those residents to park their cars there. So there were certainly, some people who weren't sure about it, but they managed to find many ways to encourage the residents to support the trial. So I'll try and find out what happened there and we can report back. But the big lesson there is that there is absolutely still campaigning going on. We look at the Netherlands and we see heaven, but people who are living there all day, they're still seeing things to improve and to campaign for. So I guess that means Camcycle will be around for a very long time, no matter how successful we are. I also got to meet Saskia, who's the CEO or chair, I believe, of Fietsbond, which is the Dutch cycling campaign, and they're still going, but they definitely, a bit like Camcycle, but perhaps more so, have this critical friend relationship with the local authority, who do recognise the importance of working with that representation. Oh, there we go. Another one of my bits that got lost in my in my computer meltdown. But what I want you to imagine here is in a junction with people cycling and with trams and with cars. And only a few months before this photo was taken, this junction had traffic lights on it. And as another experiment, the traffic lights were taken out, and what they found was that the intersection operated more efficiently and more safely. And what this came down to is that when people are cycling, they're more able to have these micro negotiations on their ride. So it just worked. If you let people work things out for themselves, it can be more efficient. But to make that work, you need to reduce the volume of car traffic. And so in this junction, the car traffic volume was reduced to that point where you didn't need the traffic lights to regulate the cycling. And again, this is one of those things in the course where it starts to confuse you, because you're like, well, no, we want to make cycling perfect. We want everybody to have their perfect cycle lanes and separate them from the traffic. But now we seem to be seeing in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, is they're bringing back some of that chaos in a few areas. So one, taking out traffic lights in some junctions, in others actually taking out the cycle lanes, because now that the car traffic is reduced so much and the cycle traffic is so strong, bikes have got that power back, and they can have the whole road and the cars are the guests. So what we should be seeing here is a junction with no traffic lights and a street where it says car is guest or auto te gast. And I found this at first a bit confronting. It's like, well, why would you take the bike lanes out? You need your bike lanes. But when your cycle traffic volume is so high, it doesn't fit in cycle lanes anymore. You need to take back that road space, and to do that you need to reduce the car traffic and give the roads to bikes. And actually, if we think about cycle lanes, really they are the result of a car-oriented approach. We built the cycle lanes because of cars. We didn't need them before cars. So it seems a phase where you need to build the cycle lanes to get the cycling safe enough, to get enough people cycling. But then when you get that level of power and dominance, reduce the car traffic, give the space back to the bikes. And that seems to be the third phase. And along with that is embracing that chaos again that we used to have on our streets, where people would have their own interactions and their own negotiations to move through the space. And it's part of our autoethnographic study. So coming all the way back to that is realizing after 3 weeks how you learned to look out the corner of your eye and anticipate the movements that other people were making. You could understand by where their feet were on the pedals, or what they were doing with their head, or were they more upright, or were they leaning into their ride. You start to anticipate what people are doing. And I think we do that quite well in Cambridge already. Lots of us have been cycling for a long time, but we perhaps don't have that same level of cycling where you can rely on someone's body language to give you a clue about what they are doing. So if I had my beautiful slide here, I would say that we need to start thinking about it's okay to have that chaos. We don't need to put all that order in. We need to let, cycling isn't like driving, where there with our full bodies, our full minds, completely in that sensory experience, negotiating with each other. And that's something that is actually a benefit of cycling. And we need to make sure we are embracing that. The other point being that we can't make our infrastructure too perfect or too boring. I mentioned earlier that my commute to class, I always chose that road because I found it really interesting. Actually, one block over, I had a perfect car-free cycle route, but it was just a bit bland. It was just a bit boring. And I found that what I wanted was to be part of the hustle and bustle of life in the city. So what we need to really be doing is taking the cars out and putting them on the boring routes that go away from our vibrant city centres, and putting cycling right through the heart so that we're part of that community. Because you can spend a lot of money on infrastructure, but if it's a bit too boring, people might not use it. And actually, if you make it too boring, it can almost become unsafe because people aren't tuned in with the environment around them, and really watching what's going on. So we need to keep that balance. We need a bit of the chaos. We need a bit of the imperfect. We need to let people have these social negotiations every day on their cycle ride. And as campaigners, how can we embrace that as a benefit of cycling when people are scared of the chaos and they want to control everything and make it all perfect? And I will say there's a lot of red light running in the Netherlands that seems to come from that theory. So anyone who's talked to me about campaigning would probably just go, oh gosh, not theory of change again. But I was so pleased that this was covered in the course as well. And what we're looking at here is a very, very simplified version of a system dynamics model. But it's something that I find really helpful when thinking about how do we actually get this change, because it's really, really complicated. And I've talked about all these random ideas today, and how does that actually come together to make an outcome that is positive for cycling? So this model is something just based on a typical lunchtime conversation I'll have with someone in the office who's like, oh, you work for the cycling campaign, why can't you get the potholes fixed? Or, what's so hard about that? And so I decided to turn my hand to this system dynamics model that we learnt during this course. So, for example, if we get potholes fixed, it will make cycling more safe. And if cycling is more safe, well, we'll get more people cycling. And if we get more people cycling, we'll have healthier people. And if we have healthier people, well, actually, we're probably going to save money on our health budgets. And if we're saving money on our health budgets, perhaps we'll have more money available to fix our potholes. And if we have more money available to fix our potholes, we can get more of our potholes fixed. Or you could go through some other routes on that model. So I think it's really, this is a very, very simple example, but I think we should try and think like this about our bigger campaigns, and actually use this to identify perhaps where there are some surprising levers we can push on to get the change that we need, or perhaps to help us find these arguments that will help explain why cycling is so important to people who are not yet so convinced. But also what this shows is it's just really, really complicated. And in the end, I found that just about every single model that I built around this, you started to just end up looking at the entire world. And this is something that I'm now finding quite challenging and confusing, because I want to be a cycling campaigner, but more and more and more, I feel that it comes down to, well, we need to change our culture, we need to change our society, we need to change our politics, we need to change our economics, or our theories about all of these things, which are actually what we need to make cycling happen, but what we need to make our society better. And if our society is better, cycling's a part of that. And I end up in this quite a big system dynamics model in my head, and just what is the right thing to focus on. But more and more and more, I believe that it's about being proactive, and we need to go further up that chain to create a bigger systemic change than just reacting to some of the small stuff we see day to day. Because the more we can change those big pictures, the more we can sell people on a better place to live, a better community, a fairer society. Actually, it becomes less and less about infrastructure, because we have less car use. We can put in some better filtered permeability, or creating these livable streets by reducing car traffic, and building bike lanes and heavy infrastructure starts to become a less expensive exercise, perhaps. But I'm sure this is one where we could have a fabulous debate in the pub about, well, what is it that we actually need to change, or work on to change, and get a better cycling place. And of course, with my computer meltdown, I perhaps have lost my next slide. No, I haven't. Excellent. So this is very strange. I do feel like I have just been rambling to myself all evening with no audience. looking at me. I can't tell if you've been bored, if I've confused you, or if it's really fascinating. I've not been able to follow the comments, so I hope it's been enjoyable. And again, I feel like all I've really wanted to do here was just plant a few seeds and give a few clues about interesting paths we could journey down further to perhaps think more about how we can campaign or what we should campaign for. But if this has sounded interesting to you, this sort of social sciences approach to creating cycling cities, then I can certainly recommend this course. And great news, you don't need to even go to the Netherlands to do it now. You don't need to pay for the big summer school course. You can do this online. And so I've put the website up here on the slide, but we've got this linked on our blog as well. So if you want to go and learn and come back and tell me whatever I got wrong, bring it on. Something else that I thought could be interesting is there's a Digital World Bike Conference, which is online until the 30th of April. So lots of speakers in the mobility field there, which could be interesting. But we also are keeping our blog updated with lots of courses. Not a fabulous picture, but I also gave a talk to Cambridge PechaKucha, which was a different version of this, focusing a lot more on how cycling could be the magic ingredient in happiness for children in the Netherlands. So you can find that as well. There's a typo in my name, so follow that URL, but we can put this link in the comments as well after the talk. But if you want to have another sort of 6-minute snapshot of this course, that's another approach that could be interesting. So that's that for my course. So before I talk about other things, I will exit this presentation and I'm going to try and look at the comments. So I think you're seeing my face again. I really hope this is working, and I'm going to find the comments. Excellent. Okay, so here are the questions that we have here. 17, oh my goodness, 17 comments. That's fantastic. Right. I'm just trying to get them all up, so bear with me, everyone. It doesn't seem to want to show me. Oh, technology. I practiced all of this before the talk, and of course, nothing is working the same today. Let's have a look. So I've had one question from Simon. Did you notice the quietness in the Amsterdam streets? I really, really did. It was fantastic. I must admit, though, that my student accommodation backed onto the railway lines, which at first was just really exciting to see all the trains going past. I'm like, oh, that one's going to Germany and that one's going to Paris. And typical transport geek, finding that very exciting. But at 5 in the morning, when the trains roared past, it was less exciting. But on the other side of the building, we had just this amazing shared space, green space, really quiet, children just able to play freely with each other without any fear of cars. It was really lovely. And then, yeah, that commute into the university, very quiet. I mean, we did still end up on some busy roads, but they were clearly the roads for cars. And it was very easy to get away from that. So quiet, but for me, the biggest thing was just that feeling of safety and comfort, which I just don't have on my daily commute to work. It's always just being a bit on edge. Excellent. Request for us to run this on Zoom next time. Unfortunately, we can never ever get agreement on the right technology to use, but we'll try. But unfortunately, this just is not showing me the 28 comments that we've received. I don't know why, everyone. I'm really sorry. Let me do my best to get that showing right now. Otherwise, I know Anna's here and she will help get me the comments. Excellent. So we have a question about bike shops in the city. That's not the presentation. We'll track that down. Lots of people saying hello. That's good. But what I need are the questions on this particular talk. Right. My question is, thanks, Alex. Hi, Alex. My question is, outside cities like Cambridge, do you think the UK's road network can be reclaimed by cyclists, or would it require too big a national effort? It's a huge national effort, and how we get this huge culture change is probably requires better experts than me. But what I think we have at the moment is a really, really interesting opportunity, and it feels bad to talk about, you know, a crisis like this, which is devastating for so many people, as an opportunity. But can we look to the positives that we see right now, which is that our streets are so much quieter and safer for people walking and cycling, particularly on roads where we don't have speeding cars, and seeing so many more people take to the bike right now. Could this help to shift people's minds a little bit about what our road environments should be like, that there should be spaces for people? I think the problems that we're seeing in parks, particularly in London, that are being closed because people are too crowded in them, all that's doing is crowding people onto pavements. What we're really seeing is that we have a severe lack of public space. And can we now start that conversation around this? So I don't know, no one knows how long this pandemic or this crisis will go on for, but I do think that at the end of it, there's going to be a real appetite for thinking about how our society should be improved, and can we as Camcycle and as campaigners be there with some really positive visions for the future. So this is probably one of the kind of biggest change moments we've had in generations, and it's up to all of us to help influence that change. And I think we can look to the Netherlands and show some amazing visions for our public spaces to help people imagine that. And I think for a lot of people, they literally can't imagine this. They've not been there. They've not seen anything like this. So how do we create really visual, inspiring imagery to help inspire people to then push their politicians to get that bigger change? It's a big question, but I think now more than ever is the opportunity. That's Alex. Lucy. Hi, Lucy. Oh, so good to see some names people I haven't seen for weeks. If I could, like Desert Islands, Discs Luxury, bring back one thing from Amsterdam that isn't already in Cambridge, what would I choose? Well, I can get stroop waffles now, so I don't need to say that. To be honest, it's just this a sense of being allowed in public space, being comfortable, being free in public space, not, you know, here, you know, I can't even walk on the pavement out the front of my house because it's got parked cars on it. I can't even walk next to someone. We have to walk in single file. I can't cross the road without being nervous. I can't ride my bike without close passes. I actually find that public space can feel stressful. In the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, it felt fun and enjoyable. You know, I received and gave my first dinky during this course, and I'm terrible at taking photos, so I have no photos of this to show you, but a dinky is the Australian word, I guess, for a bakkie. And here, that feels safe and unsafe and dangerous and naughty. You shouldn't do that. But in the Netherlands, it's just playful. You just can, because the space is yours and you're allowed to be in it. And it's just that simple. You just like, oh, you're going the way I'm going. Boop, I'm just going to jump on the back of your bike and off we go. And I don't necessarily want to have a dinky everywhere I go in Cambridge, but I want to feel that safe and that free and that relaxed in public space, which I really, really just don't feel here. Yes, in parks, but you've still got to get to the park. You've got to get to those safe green spaces. So if we could capture that feeling of safety, independence, and calmness for me, and imagine for all the children that live here, that is what I would bring. I would bottle that and bring that here for you, Lucy. A question from Howard. Do you think the current crisis gives us a unique opportunity to advocate for big changes to the daily commute? We can't go back to the way things were. It would be heartbreaking. Home working should also be in the focus for real change. I think I covered that a bit earlier on, Howard, but absolutely, this is a really unique opportunity where people are thinking really differently about their daily lives. I think we're realizing that home working actually does work for a lot of people, but I think we need to be careful, because also putting a lot of pressure on people to stay in their homes, actually we need to still make sure that we're getting out and interacting with other people. We don't want to go too far down trapping people in their houses. But I think what's also going to be interesting is what we do with economic stimulus once we get out of this. There's possibly a risk of some really big road building projects to stimulate the economy, but I think we need to really, really be focusing on a green, perhaps like a Green New Deal, but let's make sure that stimulus is in green energy and in sustainable transport like cycling and public transport. But this is the opportunity, and hopefully we can get something positive out of this. A question from John earlier on: how do we persuade UK councils to attend the online course? Yeah, that's really interesting. So we told them about it. Firstly, it's not particularly cheap, and I guess full disclosure, I funded this course and the travel to get there personally, because it isn't. In context, it's not too bad, but I don't know that our councillors would find budgets to pay for this. I do think it's better to do this in person, because you need to experience that infrastructure. But now we've got this online course, it's free. So once things start to get back to a bit of normal, I hope that we can promote this to local councillors and council officers and encourage them to go. That's a start. I can't recall, I don't believe we had any counsellors on the course. And I think it's a hard one, because you have to do an application where you have to explain how you're passionate about this course. But in a way, what we need are the people who aren't particularly passionate about this going. But there was someone on our course who was going, it was part of her job. She had to do the training. She's a consultant. She didn't even ride a bike really. And she came on the course, and it completely changed her perspective. And she's like, I'm going home, I'm getting a bike. Like, this has completely changed my mind on so many things that I hadn't thought about before, perhaps. So I do know that this kind of course can really change people's perspectives. So let's promote that. But in a way, we need to get the people who aren't convinced, and that's the hard part. Right. I don't know why I can't see the comments. It's only showing me the new ones. So I'm relying on Anna. She's passing them through to me. So Anna, are there any more questions that I need to answer? Please let me know. Good team effort here. Thank goodness for that. Bear with. We're just getting those checked off. All right, well, while I wait for that, let me just take us back to our final bits of news from Camcycle before we all get to the pub. One moment. One day I'll get better at this, but thanks everyone for bearing with me. There we go, share. Right, so we talked about where you can go to learn more. So let's talk about some Camcycle news. So in your weekly update email, we've let people know about some consultations that are still going on. We've got the Department for Transport consultations on micromobility. So that is electric scooters, the stand-up variety. And then that's one where there's still some good debate going on Cyclescape. So if you've got a point of view, please get on there and share that with us or send us an email. But we are negotiating with the various views of members to get to some consensus so that we can respond to that consultation. And once we have that, we'll put that up on our website. The other piece is the DfT launched the Decarbonising Transport Plan, which is essentially a plan to make a plan. This came out very, very quietly a few weeks ago, and we're now getting stuck into that and forming our views. So do take a look at that, and we shared the links to that in our email to members last week. And we will have an article about this in the Cambridge Independent, I believe, tomorrow. So take a look, or keep an eye out for that. So the government is planning to, there's some very, very bold goals in this plan, which conflict with recent budget announcements. So we definitely need to hold the government to account there. But there's some great stuff in there, some inconsistent things, but hopefully we're seeing some positive movement in that direction. So take a look at those consultations. Obviously, locally, everything's a bit quiet at the moment, but that's not a bad thing at this stage. You can also go onto our website and onto our blog. So while everybody's at home, if you've got some spare time, if you're missing your campaigning, it's a really good time to catch up with some reading, some watching, listening, and some learning. So we have a blog post about all sorts of books you can read, podcasts you could listen to, courses you could do, and we're keeping that up to date. So keep checking in, and we'll be sharing that content on social media over the coming months as well. But get on our website and have a look. We also got a fantastic article written by our new team member, Rosie, with a summary of all the advice, which is essentially keep on cycling, but do it safely and keep that social distancing. But you can go and take a look at that, which is a really great summary of the various cycling bodies' advice around the UK. Also, we have our events. So right after this, we have the Camcycle pub. But you do need to know the link and the password. It's in your weekly update. It's on Cyclescape. If you don't have to be a member to come, but we just need to make sure we have some level of security there. So if you'd like to join us in the pub right after this talk, just send us a message on Facebook or email and we'll get you there. Using those same details as the pub, we have our Camcycle weekly catch-ups. Because what we know is that Camcycle is we're not just a campaigning organization, but we are a community, and Camcycle is really important to many of us socially as well. And it's those informal catch-ups actually where a lot of the good campaigning happens. So we're keeping our community going by having weekly catch-ups, 2 p.m. on Thursday every week. Anyone is welcome. There is no agenda. You can talk about cycling, you can talk about anything else. We seem to do a lot of talk about certain pandemics, gardening, all sorts of things. So jump on 2 p.m. Thursdays for our catch up. And also we have our May monthly meeting, which we will do online as well. Lessons learned from tonight. We will do our best to make it run a bit smoothly. I'll tell my laptop not to crash right on the start of the meeting, and we'll have Mark Philpott's ranty highwayman joining us for that. And also, if you are out cycling, tell us what you're doing and use the hashtag #KeepOnCycling on your social media posts, because we want to make sure we're putting out those positive stories about cycling, and promoting how great cycling is as a socially distant activity. So show us your Keep On Cycling pictures. I went cycling in a formal gown on Saturday because needed to do something different. So I did my daily exercise in what was almost a ball gown, and it was great fun. So just if you want to try that, I can recommend it. And this is nearly it, but I just wanted to give a really, really quick update on Camcycle's priorities for the coming year. So we've basically cancelled a lot of things, and there's been so much uncertainty about how long we'll be in this lockdown, what the implications will be for our events and our campaigning. And so to take that uncertainty away, the trustees and I and the Camcycle team, we've decided to really take this as a strategic year, and assume that Festival of Cycling will be off. We know the Reach Ride is cancelled. We've really just turned down all of those things for the year, and instead we're going to focus on strategic projects. So we're continuing to develop our plan for the future. That's our strategy. So taking the insights from the strategy day, we'll probably do some surveys, some more research to really get that input to help us design you know, what will Camcycle look like in 5-10 years time, and what do we need to do now to make that happen? So it's a really good time for reflection. We're going to keep working on our cycling policies project. We want to get that finished because it's such an important piece of work to help more people to volunteer, to help us have more influence and explain our positions. So lots of work will be happening on that. We're going to be doing our website upgrade. There's lots and lots of work that's been happening on this behind the scenes. And I hope in the next few weeks or months, you'll start to see that it's looking physically different on our website as well. And the Cycling Policies Project and the website project are two projects where we'd love to have some more volunteers. So if you're good at writing, copy editing, reviewing content, please get in touch, because we want to create this team of people who can really power through quite a lot of content on the website and quite a few policies and really help us get this done. So if you want to be on that team, please let us know. Great to do if you're stuck at home and perhaps furloughed and you want something challenging but rewarding to do, please get in touch. We're also working behind the scenes on our systems, because as we've grown, things have got a little bit clunky and messy. So there's a bit of work to do there to just help us run more smoothly. There's definitely fundraising or perhaps preparing to do the fundraising to support these projects and our plans for the future. So we've got to prepare for that. And of course, developing volunteer resources, because part of that growth and these great plans we have for Camcycle means we need to make it much easier for people to volunteer, and we need to get the systems to support that and create the resources to help our volunteers and do training sessions, etc. So they are our plans for the coming year. And this is just, I guess, the end of my presentation. But if anyone's got any more questions about what direction we're going in now in response to the situation we see ourselves in, or perhaps more generally, let me know. I will stop sharing this screen so that I can see any further questions that you might have. And if there are none, I've really talked for too long. I'm sick of my own voice, so I'm sure you are too. So I'm just checking if there's any questions before I disconnect, but I just want to say thank you so much for listening to me for my hour and a half of talking. And I'll let you all have your turn in the pub. Just checking. Any last questions? Anna, let me know if there's anything. Nope, that's it. Excellent. Okay, everyone. Well, I hope it was nice to see me. I haven't seen you. Miss you all. Keep on cycling and do keep in touch. And we'll see you all soon. Bye.